Aloha, it's CreativeNameToStandOut again with another battle report. This time I'm bringing you a 2,500 point game between my Dark Elves and an opponent's Beastmen army. I'm really excited about playing Beastmen. Don't get to play them very often, maybe the third, possibly even the second time I've ever played them. Really excited about that. This is also the first game at my new house. This is what my deployment looks like, so let's zoom in. Starting on my right flank, we have 5 Dark Riders and a Cold One Chariot. Then moving on to the center, I have 70, yes I said 70 Dread Spears. This is every Dread Spear I have, fully painted. There's 3 characters in here, a level 2 Sorceress, I think that's the Beast one, yep, and then 2 Masters, one of which is the BSB. Next to this large block of large block of Dread Spears will be my War Hydra, and then rounding out the center will be my level 4 and 34 Executioners. Then moving out to the right flank, we see that I have another Cold One Chariot and then 5 Doomfire Warlocks. This is what my opponent's deployment looks like. Moving on to his left flank, facing my Dark Riders, I have 5 Chaos Warhounds and then another chariot, or then a chariot. And then moving on to the center, we have a large block of gore. And in that gore is 4 of his 5 characters that you saw in the beginning, except for the level 1 Shadow who's behind the Herdstone. Then we have a unit of Minotaurs, and then a Gore, I think that's what it's called. Moving on to the right flank, we have another unit of Gore, then a unit of Warhounds, and another Chariot. So the Dark Elves do get the first turn, and I move everything up. I don't even Vanguard. I'm not in a rush to get in close combat, because that's what the Beastmen want to do. So I'm going to take my time, shoot them with magic, shoot them with like the couple of repeater crossbows I have, and then engage later. So I move everything up, of course, except for the giant horde of Dread Spears, and that's because the forest ends up being a poison forest. That means dangerous terrain text for everybody. I flake out, don't end up moving them. Probably a mistake. But after that we jump to the magic phase. I cast Flesh of Stone up on the Dread Spears just because I can, and then I'm going to use Doom Bolt hopefully to kill off some of his chaff. I don't, but that's the idea. I'm going to use Doom Bolt to kill off maybe one of the chariots hopefully. In the shooting phase, I plink off a couple gore from the character-filled unit, and I pass the turn. And we go to Beastman turn 1, and the first thing he does is declare a charge with his Warhounds into my shades. He's kind of straddling the flank and the front, but he's definitely more in my flank, but it allows me to take some shots at him. So he declares that charge. I kill off 3 of the dogs, and they break. He doesn't have any other charges, of course. We go straight in the movement phase. Doesn't move too much with the gore units, at least. But as you can see here, he pushes the Minotaurs up into the center behind that wall. Pretty good defensive position right there. And then over here on the right flank, he's trying his best to box in these Doomfire Warlocks. They are fast calves. They're going to be kind of tricky to box in and pin in place. But he does a pretty good job here. If I charge those dogs and don't overrun, he's going to hit me with the chariot. If I do overrun, there's a good chance I'm going to run into the gore, and he's going to be able to pin me in place at least. So I think that's a pretty good move. I think the only thing he's overlooking here is the fact that I can probably weave in between the chariot and the dogs. The only way he's going to be able to stop that is if I fail a march block test. So pretty good tactic here considering the tools he has. So usually if I have a mistake on my end when I'm playing the game, I usually just rewrite history, and you guys never know any better. I just change the facts and make it all look right. But in this particular case, I just can't. There's just no way around it because too many other things are affected by what decisions are made in this game, in this part of the game. Not to say that this, I think, impacts, you know, the overall result of anything. But if you're a stickler for specifics, there's no way I can explain this away. So I'll tell you what mistake we did. And then later on you can keep this in mind if you're wondering, well, why did you do X instead of Y? Well, it's probably because of this. So my opponent has both of the death sniping spells. He has Caress and Fate. Caress, of course, wounds you on a 4-up. Fate doesn't. So my tactic with both of these is to most likely let Fate or Caress go through because it wounds on a 4-up, and then try my best to stop Fate. And I think that's a pretty good tactic because you don't know how many hits you're going to generate. You're not guaranteed to get a lot. The hits you do generate are going to go 50-50 on the wounds, and then I'm going to have a 3+ ward save. So as you can see in this picture, my wizard let Caress go through. She ends up getting hit 10 times, which goes down to 7 because of the reduction for whatever stat it counts against. And then that goes 50-50. She gets 3 wounds, and I, of course, end up failing 2 of my ward saves. So she has 2 wounds, and that's just from Caress. So I really do need to stop Fata Bajuna, and so he goes to cast it, and I throw my Dispel Scroll. I'm just forced to because he rolls really high on 5 dice, and that's what happens. Now later on you're going to see that I use my Dispel Scroll again. So why did I use 2 Dispel Scrolls? It's not because I paid for it, of course. It's just simply that scenario should never have happened. We both forgot that Bajuna is only 12 inches, so we didn't realize this till I think the beginning of turn 3. I want to say it was turn 3. We didn't realize this. Or maybe it was the end of turn 2. I don't remember. But that's when we realized we made the mistake. And my opponent was kind enough to give me my Dispel Scroll back because I should never have used it because that scenario should never have happened. I mean, that, of course, I think that's pretty fair. I mean, he ends up losing 5 dice on a spell that he could never cast, and he probably could have used otherwise for some other spell. So it was a pretty fair trade. But yeah, so that's the mistake we made. So if you have any other questions about why, again, why I chose to do this instead of that, and maybe in turn 2 or turn 3, it's because we didn't realize the mistake till later, and then my opponent gave me my Dispel Scroll back. So there you go, and we'll continue on with the shooting phase. And that shooting phase consists of the Cygor dropping a rock right on top of my Executioners. I lose a couple, and then this is an overview of the board as we go into Dark Elf turn 2. And here's another overview of the board. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to move these Doomfire Warlocks here on the right flank through the hole that he has here between the Chariot and the Dogs, but I actually failed that March test. So I ended up moving my Doomfire Warlocks back, hoping that I can Doombolt away that Chariot. This time I don't move any of my other units, just the giant block of Dread Spears. I realized by mistake here. And I do lose a couple, but it wasn't enough to justify me not moving them at all in the first turn. Before I forget to mention it, I want to say that I think a theme through this game is that both of us are generating a lot of magic dice in our phases. Him, of course, it's built in the list, and I'm just keeping pace with him through my dice rolls. I do use up his Dispel Scroll this turn, and I do get a Doom Bolt off, which you can see knocks out the Chariot on the right. And then over here I plink off some wounds from the Chariot, and I kill off a couple more gore from his character heavy unit. This is a look at the Beastmen center lines as we go into Beastmen turn 2. And what he's going to do is declare charge with his dogs into my Doomfire Warlocks, figuring if he kills one, it's worth it. He also gets a charge with the Chariot into my Chariot. And these guys actually rally, so that was pretty surprising. Other than that, this is what you can see from up top. I think the gore are the only thing that really move up here on the right. Everything else stays put. In the second Beastman magic phase, my opponent's going to cast Soul Blight on my Executioners, Wild Form on his Minotaurs, and then I'm going to stop Miasma from getting off on my Executioners. And then he's going to cast. He's also going to cast Caress. And at this point, you're probably thinking, "Oh, well, if you had your Dispel Scroll, you could have stopped it this turn." And that's not entirely true because chances are I would have let that through without using my Dispel Scroll against it. But because that's my tactic. But sure enough, he rolls boxcars for the number of hits. He wounds quite a few times, I think 7, and I fail enough of my 3-up saves to lose my Sorceress. And mind you, I did get a wound back from the lore attribute for life, so it just wasn't meant to be. In the combat phase, I shouldn't have to say it, but of course those dogs died before they even struck. And then this Chariot just careens right through my Chariot and overruns to this position. So with the loss of the level 4, I realized I'm going to lose the range game against the Beastmen because their magic's just way better than mine. I wish I would realize this a little bit earlier, and I might not have lost the level 4 had I played recognizing that, but I did. So I'm rushing to get into combat. The Executioners jump the wall to get to the Minotaurs, but they fall short, and the Gore Chariot runs into the Gore unit. You can also see here the Doomfire Warlocks are finally making their way into the backfield, and after that we're going to jump into Magic. So I misspoke last turn when I said that the Executioners got the Soul Blight. It was in fact the Sorceress that got Soul Blighted, which, helped out that boxcars just a bit more. Other than that, though, the executioners don't have it, so when I cast Wild Form on them, it helps me offset the Minotaur's Wild Form. I think I'm doing that to dissuade him from charging them. And then we go to combat, and the Chariot doesn't kill, but I think 2 of the Gore. He loses combat, but he does stick. So here we are in Beastmen turn 3, and you can see that my Shades are over there hunting his level 1 Shadow Mage, and so he wants to stop that. He charges the Gore to clear him out of the way. They end up here after they flee. I do pass all my break checks. Then he decides to charge these Minotaurs over here into the Dread Spears, but he rolls double 1s on his charge, and that's just really bad. He exposes his flank, but he's a smart player, and he tries his best to mitigate this by bringing the monster over here to protect his flank. I mean, that's the best he can do. It is going to cause him some problems, though. So the last thing he does in the movement phase before he goes into the magic is swing this Chariot to the rear. We jump in the magic phase. He goes for Soul Blight first. I figure I can offset that with Wissons, so I let that through. Then he goes for Wissons. I stop that dead. He then tries to cast Curse of Anra here, and this is where he gives me my Dispel Scroll back, so I go ahead and use it. And then finally cast Caress because he has the dice advantage, and he ends up killing my BSB. Now, I wasn't totally vulnerable. I had a 3+ magic resistance because of the Ring of Hotek, and I don't think he did but 2 wounds to him, but I did fail those 2 ward saves. The only combat in his turn is that Chariot against the Gore. Again, I don't do enough combat res to win. This time I do break, and this is what it looks like. So we go into Dark Elf turn 4, and I have some pretty good charges to declare here. I'm going to declare the Executioners into the Cygore. Feel pretty confident, but I definitely want to kill it, so I also declare a charge with the Doomfire Warlocks into its flank. That way I can ensure that it dies and lets my Executioners overrun into those Minotaurs' flank. I then also charge the Hydra into the Minotaurs. That way I can trigger the double combat with my Executioners. Here's a look at my Dark Riders coming down to try to kill off those Warhounds, and it looks like my Shades are now in front of my Spearmen. I must have fled from the Chariot charge also from last turn and just forgot to document that in the last turn. And then over here you can see on the right side the Gore are here just so you can have reference. So I'm going to get Curse of Anra here off on the Minotaurs. My opponent's going to let that through. And then the Cygore has a special rule where you have to take a leadership test, I think at the beginning of the magic phase, and if you fail, then your sorceress who fails will take miscast on these spells they'll fail to get. And sure enough, I do that with my Beast Wizard. I try for Wild Form on 3 dice. I come up short. I had failed the leadership test earlier, so I miscast 5, and that's going to end my magic phase. So that is very interesting. You know, I'm sure that rule doesn't come up very often. We then go into the combat phase, and the Doomfire Warlocks really deliver. They allow me to overrun with my Executioners into the flank of the Minotaurs. They do a number on the Minotaurs, at least enough to break them. I choose to overrun with both of them. Maybe I'm a little too aggressive here, but I really want to get these points. And unfortunately, this is going to look like it's a good thing. I overrun into his character-heavy unit with both of my units, and that's really not what I wanted to do, but that's what happens. And then after that, we go into Beastmen turn 4. The Beastmen end up charging the Chariot off the board. The dog pushes the Shades around, the last remaining dog, and then this Chariot slams in the rear of my Dread Spears. We have an overview of the board before we jump into the magic phase. All the spells on the Executioners, so things are looking really, really bad for my Executioners. They're in the flank, that's a good thing, but yeah, all these spells end up going on the Executioners. I knew it was going to be kind of tough already with not all my Executioners engaged in the flank because that Shadow Mage cut them off. But yeah, with all these modifiers, things are not looking too good. And sure enough, we go into combat, and the Hydra gets smacked around by the Beast Lord by himself, kills the Hydra outright very easily. And then with the rest of the combat going into Executioners, even from the flank, he does a lot. And I end up not needing Snake Eyes. I think I needed a 3, but I don't stick, and I flee. And I count myself lucky just to get away and still be above 25%. We go into the combat with the chariot versus the dread spears. The chariot's going to win, but I'm going to pass. More importantly, you can see I'm pulling off guys from the back rank, and then we got in kind of a disagreement about who moved into each other. I insisted that he moved in towards me, but he thought that I would have to move my block into him. We were in disagreement. I don't know how we resolved it. I think my opponent just was like, oh, whatever, and it moved the chariot forward. But if anybody knows for certain, please comment below, because I'm not sure now. We go into my next turn. The executioners do not rally, and we go ahead and you see I move around. I'm hunting down that shadow mage, and we jump into magic. In the magic phase, I really just want to try to get off Curse of Enter here. If I can get anything else off, it's a boost, but unfortunately I failed with the first spell, and then the second spell gets easily dispelled. I then go for Curse, get it off irresistibly, so that's great. It's on the unit with all the characters in it, but it is a miscast. I do the big dimensional cascade. She survives the cascade, but doesn't survive the wound, and then we move on from there. I hunt down the shadow mage finally. We go into this combat with the chariot, and I realize I can make way with my master. I forgot about that, and I kill off the chariot very easily. So my opponent wants to try to get the executioners, but not leave his flank open. So what he does is he declares a charge with this character. I think it's like his level 2 beast out to try to catch the executioners. He doesn't quite do it. He just pushes them up a little bit. And then he reforms his unit to face the Dread Spear horde. That of course triggers Curse. That kills like a few gore here and there, and I think puts a wound on his lord. As we go into Beastman's 5th magic phase, it's actually a relatively small magic phase. I mean, it's still 9, but considering most of our turns have been 12, it's relatively small. So he's going to go for Caress on my character, my last one. He doesn't quite kill him, he only puts a wound, so he has to use Fate to finish him off. But that pretty much works, and as you can see here in this pick, that is my master who's dead. That's pretty much the rest of his turn. We go into Dark Elf turn 6. In my last turn with the Dread Spear, Soul Blinded, and that far right Gore unit with Wild Form, I'm not going to declare any charges, so I'm going to put things in position to redirect or flee. And I also put him in a position to maybe hunt down that last sorcerer. I don't know what the points are right now, but hopefully maybe I can get a tie if I kill this sorcerer. In the magic phase, I get off Soul Blight. Probably should have targeted the sorcerer or whatever, his wizard, but instead put it on the unit. And then I go for Doombolt, but that gets stopped. So unfortunately in the shooting phase, things don't pan out. I don't end up killing off that last Bray Shaman. So my opponent says, well, let's add up the points, and sure enough, we add them up, and he's ahead, so he goes ahead and calls it, which is pretty smart, because you don't want to, you know, dimensional a cascade when you're ahead, and it's a Beastman victory. So yes, this was definitely a fun game. I enjoyed it. Wish I could play against Beastmen a lot more. If I were to talk about anything I did really wrong, it definitely was deployment. Death Magic really kicked my butt, but I really could have done more to prevent the death of my level 4. Kind of just stuck her out there in the open like I usually do, because I looked across the table, thought he didn't have much ranged threats, and boy was I wrong when that Death Magic started hitting me. Sure, maybe you could say I had some bad luck with my ward saves there, but really I could have made it so much harder for him to kill me had I put the Sorceress in that giant Dread Spear block. Then I would have had a 2+ ward save against Death Magic, and I know I didn't roll that badly. I know I don't think I rolled any 1s if I were to think about it. So, you know, my opponent really, you know, used that magic to great effect. Did some really clever moves, I thought, when he was trying to pin in my Doomfire Warlocks and some other, you know, things that I thought were pretty good. So he definitely deserved the win here. And you know, it's a lot of fun. So hope you enjoyed this battle report. I enjoyed making it. I do appreciate everybody's likes, comments, and subscriptions. And you know, like usual, I'll have another one out next week. So I'll see you guys later.